Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to speak on the Liberals' Do No Time, Soft on Crime Bill C-5. This Do No Time, Soft on Crime Liberal bill eliminates mandatory jail time for serious firearms-related offenses, serious drug offenses, and significantly expands conditional sentencing orders, otherwise known as house arrest, for an array of violent and other serious offenses. Yesterday in this House, the Minister of Justice, in an effort to defend this soft on crime bill, said something truly remarkable. He said, "Don't worry about it because Bill C-5 targets situations where, quote, public security and public safety are not at risk," end of quote. Really, Madam Speaker? Perhaps the minister should read his own bill.
That's right.
Because if he did, he would learn that Bill C-5 eliminates mandatory jail time for such firearms offenses as robbery with firearm, weapons trafficking, extortion with a firearm, using a firearm with the intent to injure, using a firearm in the commission of a crime, among other serious firearms offenses. And the Minister of Justice says that Bill C-5 targets situations where public security and public safety are not at risk. Are you kidding me, Madam Speaker? I think Canadians would be absolutely shocked if they knew that the Minister of Justice thought that robbery with a firearm, using a firearm in the commission of an offense, and discharging a firearm with the intent to injure constitute crimes in which public security and public safety are not an issue. When you literally cannot make this stuff up. But yet, there he was in this place asserting that with a straight face. And it goes on, Madam Speaker, because, as I noted, this bill significantly expands house arrest. With the passage of Bill C-5, criminals convicted of such offenses as kidnapping a minor, arson for a fraudulent purpose, assault with a weapon, impaired driving causing death, and sexual assault will be able to serve their sentence at home instead of behind bars where they belong. So there you have it. Sexual assault, kidnapping a minor, arson for a fraudulent purpose, but the minister says Bill C-5 targets situations where public security and public safety are not at risk. As I say, you cannot make this stuff up. Now, Madam Speaker, I'll tell you that who disagrees with the minister. Many of the key witnesses who came to the Justice Committee, representatives of law enforcement, victims advocates, and community leaders, they have a very different take on the impact that Bill C-5 is going to have. Take the crime of sexual assault. Jennifer Dunn of the London Abused Women's Centre came before the committee and said that now that perpetrators of sexual assault will be able to serve their sentence at home, victims of sexual assault, particularly women, are going to be put at even greater risk because they're going to be stuck in the same communities often as the perpetrator. No kidding. Newsflash to the minister. Then there's Andre Jelena, a retired detective sergeant from the Montreal Police Service who characterized Bill C-5 as, quote, a race to the bottom, end of quote. And he went on in saying, quote, "It is paradoxical and totally dichotomous to think that abolishing mandatory minimum sentences that apply to criminal offenses involving firearms will have a beneficial effect on our communities," end of quote. Staff Sergeant Michael Rowe, who appeared before the committee representing the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, said that with respect to the mandatory jail times involving serious firearms offenses that Bill C-5 seeks to repeal, that these specific mandatory jail times, quote, "hold significant value when addressing public safety and gang-related violence," end of quote. Annie Samson, a former Montreal municipal councillor and mayor of a borough in Montreal that is the most multicultural part of Montreal, but unfortunately has been ravaged by serious violence, serious gun and gang violence, said that Bill C-5, in eliminating mandatory jail time for serious firearms offenses, will, quote, "exacerbate impunity," end of quote. So there you have it. You know, contrary to the Minister of Justice's ridiculous assertion, key witnesses before the Justice Committee said very clearly that Bill C-5 will, in fact, undermine public security, undermine public safety, and put victims at risk, particularly victims of such crimes as sexual assault. You know, Madam Speaker, who will also be hurt, who will be put at risk, contrary to the talking points of the Liberals? Persons struggling with addictions, vulnerable Canadians. Now, the Minister of Justice at second reading spoke about the fact that we have an opioid crisis in Canada, and he's quite right. And he spoke about the need, in order to address that crisis, to implement measures around education, treatment, and rehabilitation. He wouldn't find argument on this side of the House on that point. But, Madam Speaker, Bill C-5 does none of those things. What Bill C-5 does do, however, is eliminating mandatory jail time for the very people, the very criminals, who are profiting off putting poison on our streets that are killing 20 Canadians a day, 7,000 Canadians a year in the opioid crisis. Those are the people that are going to benefit from Bill C-5, because Bill C-5 eliminates mandatory jail time for producers and pushers of Schedule I and Schedule II drugs under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, drugs like fentanyl and crystal meth. So I say to the Minister of Justice, I challenge him to explain how it is that simply eliminating mandatory jail time for the very producers and pushers of these killer drugs is going to make anyone more safe. It simply will not, Madam Speaker. This bill really does speak to the priorities of this government, or I would submit the misplaced priorities of this government. This government's priority is to put criminals first, public security, public safety, and the rights of victims be damned. This is a reckless and dangerous bill that will undermine safety in our communities, put victims last, and put vulnerable Canadians at risk. And it's why we on this side of the House, on the Conservative side, will continue to fight this bill every step of the way.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And While I disagree with my honourable colleague on his framing of the bill, I always appreciate the very well-delivered speeches he gives. I wanted to ask him, he quoted, I believe, selectively Jennifer Dunn in her appearance before the committee talking about conditional sentencing, but I also read what Jennifer Dunn said at committee, which is that women are not protected by the law unless all mandatory minimum penalties are considered. And basically, she seems to be arguing that all mandatory minimums should be removed from the criminal code. Does the honourable member believe that that really buttresses the case that he's making in his speech?
The honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, what I would say in response to that is that I don't know how you're going to make anyone safe by eliminating mandatory jail time for serious firearms and drug-related offenses. And with respect to conditional sentencing, which was the main purpose of her testimony, she noted that it is going to have a very negative impact on women because those predators are going to be serving time in their community of the victim, and on top of that, that it's often difficult to supervise these people, again putting vulnerable people at risk. So, Madam Speaker, very simply put, this bill from start to finish is a badly drafted bill that gets it precisely backwards, and it's why we're going to continue to fight it.
Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Rivière.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Mille. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague for his speech. He mentions security a lot. Security is, of course, very important. In Montreal, we're experiencing some difficult things recently. Here's my question. Does he really think that a Canadian with a mental health problem, with a drug addiction problem, can be a security threat? The Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, that is not, with respect to my colleague, that is not what I said. What I said is that when it comes to addressing those who are struggling with addictions, we need to look at alternatives. We need to support treatment and rehabilitation efforts. Incarceration should be a last resort. And indeed, there is a directive issued by the Public Prosecution Service of Canada not to prosecute in the case of simple possession. Where this bill is wrong, however, is that it eliminates mandatory jail time, not for simple possession, of which there is no mandatory jail time, but for the producers and pushers of the very drugs that are hurting those who are suffering and struggling with addiction. That's the problem with Bill C-5.
Comments. The honourable member for Nunavut.
I'd like to thank the member for his intervention. If we are to address systemic racism in our justice system and over-incarceration of Indigenous peoples, racialized people, and Canadians living in poverty, then we need to do more than the timid measures put forward by the Liberals in this bill. And I wonder if the member can share some ideas of how this bill can be improved so that it's less timid and actually serves to address the systemic racism that we see in Canada.
Okay. The honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
I thank the member for Nunavut for her question, and respectfully, my position with respect to this bill is it's got to be scrapped, it's got to be defeated, and the government needs to go back to the drawing board. On the issue of systemic racism and the impacts that the criminal justice system has on marginalized Canadians, yes, that is an issue that needs to be addressed. But one of the things that was noted at committee is that many of the victims, in fact, a disproportionate number of victims, also come from racialized and vulnerable communities. So this bill, that's where what we need to make a priority is putting victims first, and this bill puts victims last and criminals first.